Pokemon get stronger when they evolve. That's like a core tenet of the entire franchise. After all, if evolving your Pokemon made them worse, then you wouldn't go through the trouble in the first place. But not all evolutions are created equal. And sometimes the absolute garbage Pokemon you just spent an entire week trying to evolve simply wasn't worth the effort. Now obviously, not every Pokemon is supposed to be a big hit. Your Route 1 bug Pokemon shouldn't be as strong as your endgame dragon. I made an entire video breaking down why it's a good thing that some Pokemon are stronger than others, and how within a generation of Pokemon, it's good to have a whole wide spectrum of strength. But what I think is really interesting is when a Pokemon's evolution comes in a later generation, sometimes over a decade after the original Pokemon was introduced. Starting in Generation 2, Game Freak began introducing new evolutions to existing Pokemon lines, with a major wave coming in Generation 4. Now I can tell you as somebody who was a kid when Diamond and Pearl came out, these new evolutions were really cool. Pokemon that I thought were finished, having already reached their final forms, were suddenly bursting with new potential that I'd never even considered. And interestingly enough, it seemed like the Pokemon being given new evolutions were Pokemon not quite strong enough to keep up with competitive play at the time. Like, let's be honest, Roselia and Piloswine are not doing much against Garchomp and Cresselia. But not every Pokemon given a new chance at competitive viability was taken seriously. In fact, some of them appear to be a big joke to the big Pikachu pulling the strings. And it was one of these Pokemon that actually made me want to make a video about this in the first place. A Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet. Dudunsparce. Dudunsparce is the Generation 9 evolution to the Generation 2 Pokemon Dunsparce. Now, Dunsparce is something of a fan favorite within the community, in part because it's goofy looking, and I think also in part because it's just such a terrible Pokemon by competitive standards that it makes people love it. Terrible stats and bad typing combine to make a Pokemon that I can't even compare to a wet paper bag for fear of insulting the bag. But a beloved Pokemon with no viability is the perfect vessel for evolution. To use Dunsparce as a base, but improve it, fix its flaws, give it a fresh coat of paint and a new motor. Evolution is great because unlike regional variants and Mega Evolution, you aren't tied to the total stat points of the pre-evolution in any way when your Pokemon evolves. You want to just give it 100 more speed and I don't know, 50 more attack? Go nuts, kid. Evolution is also an opportunity to modify typing. Dunsparce's popularity resulted in 20 years of fan art imagining what secret wonders it was hiding. Maybe a huge dragon type with sprawling wings putting the Salamances and Dragonites of the world to shame. But that isn't what we got. Instead, Game Freak left Dunsparce alone for 23 years, only to finally break out Dudunsparce, a slightly longer Dunsparce. And you're probably thinking like, okay, but there has to be some kind of gimmick, right? Surely if they were going to make us wait for 2 decades, they'd be giving us a little more juice, right? And the thing is that, yes, Dudunsparce actually does have a signature gimmick. When you evolve your Dunsparce into Dudunsparce, there is a 1 in 100 chance that your Dudunsparce will be slightly longer. It'll have one more segment to be exact. And that's it. There's no functional difference between Dudunsparce 2 segment and Dudunsparce 3 segment. It's just a cosmetic difference. I guess you can differentiate them by calling the longer one Dudunsparce. Dudunsparce is a pure normal type Pokemon with stats that are better than its pre-evolution, but not by enough to justify using it. They gave it a signature move called Hyper Drill, which is in theory good because it ignores protecting moves, but the problem is that Dudunsparce isn't actually strong enough to pressure opponents to protect in the first place. Now, to be clear, Dudunsparce is definitely more usable than Dunsparce. Like, you can use it, it just won't be very good. The main problem is that the stats just aren't good enough to keep up with the modern world, to be honest. Like, if you really wanted to use it, you could use, I don't know, it has the ability Serene Grace, which doubles the effect of secondary moves, and it gets the move Rock Slide, which, you know, has a high chance to flinch, but Dudunsparce is really slow. But it does learn Tailwind, so maybe you could do something with that. I don't know. It's not a very good strategy, but it is really frustrating to play against. So if you want to try and make your opponents turn their Switch 1 into a Switch 2 the traditional way, you could use it, I guess. Also, in case you weren't aware, you also have a 1 in 100 chance to get a 3-segment subscribe button if you subscribe on this video specifically. This also gives you a 100% chance of getting recommended other great videos in the future. It's actually not 100%. I don't know how YouTube's algorithm works. Sometimes it won't recommend videos, but you have a higher chance if you subscribe. Now, obviously, a lot of these cross-generation evolutions are a big success. Some of the other Generation 9 evolutions in particular have been amazing. In Scarlet and Violet's first 2 years, Farigiraf placed 1st and 2nd at the World Championships, and Annihilate and Kingambit have both put up a ton of results too. But talking about Dudunsparce really got me thinking, what other cross-generational evolutions have missed the mark? One that I was personally really disappointed by was Kleavor. Kleavor. That's what I think Kleavor sounds like. Scizor is one of my favorite Pokemon. I actually used it to win US Nationals back in the day. And so when I heard that Scyther was getting a new evolution and that it was getting a signature move that could do something that no other Pokemon in the game could match, I was excited. However, when I finally tried Kleavor for myself, I was disappointed. Kleavor is a bug and rock type Pokemon. Can I just say, by the way, that every time I say a line like that, I feel like the frickin' Pokédex. Kleavor is a bug and rock type Pokemon. Are you getting that, or is that just me? Anyway, bug and rock are two of the single worst types in the game. But surprisingly, when you put them together, it's actually not as bad as you might think. Bug cancels out 3 of rock's weaknesses to fighting, grass, and ground, and rock resists the flying and fire type moves that bug is weak to, resulting in only 3 weaknesses total, which is pretty good. And the stats are pretty well distributed, but there is a problem. While Kleavor doesn't have any glaring weaknesses in its stats, it also doesn't really have any huge strengths. It's not blazingly fast, supremely strong, or absurdly tanky. It's a pretty well-rounded jack of all trades. However, this isn't factoring in its ability Sharpness, which gives certain moves a massive power boost. Kleavor's unfortunate weakness lies in its signature move, Stone Axe. This move should be ridiculous. It's a rock type move that, when it hits a target, sets up Stealth Rocks on the opponent's side of the field. Stealth Rocks cause any Pokemon switching in on the opponent's side to take damage based on how weak to rock they are. They're normally not worth setting up because in the official competitive format, you only bring 4 Pokemon to any given match, and 2 of those Pokemon start out already on the field, so even if you get Stealth Rocks up turn 1, you might only ever damage 2 Pokemon with them before the end of the battle. Stealth Rocks normally can only be set up by using the move, well, Stealth Rocks, which doesn't do anything except set up Stealth Rocks. I'm never going to be able to say Stealth Rocks again after this. Now, of course, if there were a better way of setting them up, of course you would love to have them. Breaking Focus Ashes and dealing a quarter of Incineroar's health every time it switches in is great, but it's just not worth spending an entire attack for. What makes Kleavor so appealing is the fact that Stone Axe sets up the Stealth Rocks while dealing damage. But Stone Axe is also the problem. You might think that the issue is that it's a relatively weak move, coming in at only 65 base power. But remember, Kleavor has the ability Sharpness, making Stone Axe a perfectly respectable attack. The true issue is that, for some reason I cannot fathom, Stone Axe has only 90% accuracy. This might not sound like a huge deal, but remember, Kleavor isn't so strong that landing a hit is going to pick up a KO most of the time. And it's also not so bulky that it can afford to take hits without doing anything back. 90% accuracy sounds pretty good, but Kleavor just can't afford to miss 1 out of every 10 attacks. And without a reliable rock type move, competitive players just couldn't justify the rock and bug typing or the awkwardly distributed base stats. And poor Kleavor got left in the ancient past of Hisui. A Pokemon from the ancient past of the franchise that's always felt like a disappointment competitively is Bellossom. Now, I really love Bellossom's design, so before you type an angry comment, I'm on your side. I think it's an incredibly designed Pokemon. But also, because the design is so great, I think I feel extra let down that it's just such a garbage Pokemon competitively. Now, to be fair, Bellossom is from Johto. And if you look at a lot of the Johto Pokemon, it's pretty clear that they weren't designing with competitive play in mind. But even ignoring the fact that Bellossom has stats worse than Magmar, there's another issue: the typing. It's pretty rare for a Pokemon to go from a dual type pre-evolution to a single type evolution, but that's exactly what happened to poor Bellossom. From a grass and poison type Gloom to a pure grass type Dancer. At least the design is cute. Bellossom did get given a little treat in the form of After You, which is a move that forces the target to move immediately after the user. This would, in theory, allow it to pair with strong sun-setting attackers like Torkoal or Groudon, activating Bellossom's Chlorophyll ability and allowing its buddy to fire off a super fast Eruption or Precipice Blades before the opponent can move. There's only one problem. Okay, there's several problems. There's a bunch of Pokemon that do this better. Also, for whatever reason, Bellossom is actually really slow, so even in the sun, it's not necessarily going to be outspeeding all the Pokemon you would want. Now, I did just mention Magmar, and that's actually another category of Pokemon that I want to talk about. Specifically, I want to talk about evolutions that only matter because they happen to make their pre-evolution better. This is only possible because of the Eviolite item, which increases both defensive stats by a whopping 50%, but only works on Pokemon that can still evolve further. Eviolite tends to be pretty decent on these cross-generation evolutions because the starting Pokemon was designed intending to be the final form. Evolutions like Magmortar, Electivire, Honchkrow, Blissey, and Tangrowth see basically zero use in competitive play, because by evolving, they lose access to the Eviolite item, and their stats don't increase enough via evolution to actually justify using them. It's worth noting that most of the Pokemon that shine in this category are support-oriented Pokemon, not intending to do damage, but instead to fill a utility role. Magmar, Electabuzz, and Tangela support the team with redirection, while Murkrow offers speed control in the form of Tailwind. Murkrow is an interesting case because while its stats aren't amazing even with Eviolite, it's still always used instead of Honchkrow because Honchkrow loses access to the incredible ability Prankster when it evolves. Now, funnily enough, Chansey is the exception to this rule. When Chansey has been seen in competitive play, it's normally as this kind of terrible raid boss that is one of the most frustrating Pokemon to go up against. Now, it hasn't been used for a couple of years now, but the way the strategy used to work is that you would pair Chansey with a Pokemon like Shuckle or Carbink, who knew the attack Guard Split. Guard Split averages the defenses of the user and the target. So if Chansey has 60 defense and Shuckle has 300, they would each end up with 180 defense. Importantly though, this average happens before the Eviolite is applied. So Chansey's 180 defense is actually 270. This is what makes Blissey irrelevant. Even though its base defense is literally double Chansey's, that sounds more impressive than it is. I mean, it's base 5 versus base 10. 5 points higher sounds a lot less impressive than double, whatever. It doesn't really matter because when you factor in the Eviolite, Blissey is actually way less tanky than Chansey, even when you don't factor in Guard Split. Now, this next one isn't exactly a cross-generational evolution, but it's also not a cross-generational evolution. I don't really know where to put this one, but basically I want to talk about Alolan Raichu. Alolan Raichu was added to the game right after I won the World Championships with regular Raichu. And maybe it's because I just like Raichu, but over the years I've tried to make it work a couple times and it has always fallen short. The issue is really that Alolan Raichu is set up to be this fast special attacker, but at the same time it is tied to Raichu's stats, which just aren't very good. And that means that you have Alolan Raichu who's this like special attacker in theory, but it's actually not that strong. Now Alolan Raichu does have a signature Z move and a signature ability, plus it's got one of the best shiny forms in the game in my opinion, but if you want to actually win, Alolan Raichu probably won't help you get there. Okay, as long as I'm bending the criteria a little bit, I want to talk about some mega evolutions. Now technically this is an evolution that happens in a later generation, so don't yell at me in the comments, okay? Now the biggest offender of any of the mega evolutions is, in my opinion, Mega Garchomp. You would think that giving one of the single best Pokemon of all time a new form with 100 more stat points would create a monster that could ruin competitive play, but somehow Game Freak managed to make Mega Garchomp worse than regular Garchomp. For some reason that I truly cannot fathom, they dumped 40 of its new stat points into its special attack stat, which is almost maximally inefficient since it wastes as many points as possible while still not being enough to actually justify using Mega Garchomp as a special attacker. Even worse than the special attack though is the fact that for some reason, Mega Garchomp actually gets slower, losing 10 of its speed points. This puts it from 102 base speed before Mega Evolution to 92 after. Now 10 points might not sound like a lot, but back in the day, the general rule for if a Pokemon was fast was if it had more than 100 base speed. Garchomp at 102 is fast. Mega Garchomp at 92, not so much. And there were a lot of good Mega Evolutions sitting exactly at that base 100 mark, including Mega Kangaskhan and Mega Charizard Y. So for Garchomp to go from outspeeding those Pokemon to underspeeding them, not a good look. To add insult to injury, Mega Garchomp's ability is also a downgrade. It gains Sand Force, which does absolutely nothing unless the sand is up. Regular Garchomp has two arguably better abilities in Rough Skin, which does good passive damage, especially against the most popular Mega and Kangaskhan, and Sand Veil, which also only activates in sand, but gives all moves targeting Garchomp a chance to miss, which will normally have a bigger impact than the power boost from Sand Force. Putting everything together and keeping in mind that you need to give up both your item and your Mega Evolution if you want to use Mega Garchomp, it's not a mystery why it never saw any play. Now, okay, I can't figure out if one of my all-time favorite Pokemon actually belongs on this list. That's not true. It certainly doesn't belong on this list, but I want to talk about it anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. What do y'all know about Chimecho? So Chimecho doesn't technically belong on this list because, like, rather than being a Pokemon who had an evolution introduced later on, instead it's a Pokemon who had a pre-evolution introduced in a later generation. And that's Chingling, baby. I think Chingling is probably one of the most forgettable baby Pokemon. I love Chimecho and I don't have any kind of opinion about Chingling. Maybe people like it. I don't know. If people like it, they'll tell me in the comments for sure. I love Chimecho's design. I love its silly little face, but I don't love it competitively. Listen, Chimecho isn't even the best non-legendary psychic type Pokemon introduced in Generation 3 with Levitate, okay? And that's not even comparing it to some of the monsters that they're letting out of the cages nowadays. My question is, if they were going to introduce a pre-evolution in Generation 4, why not just introduce an evolution instead? Chimecho is so bad that it's one of the only times a Pokemon has received a stat increase between generations. In Sun and Moon, Chimecho received a whopping 30 extra stat points, which is about a third of a Mega Evolution. And yet, it is so bad that it doesn't matter at all. Even giving Chimecho 100 more stat points probably wouldn't have been enough. I'm hopeful that Chimecho will one day receive a little love, a Mega Evolution or a real evolution, but until then, it's staying in the box. There's other Pokemon that fall into this category too, like Sudowoodo getting Bonsly, Jinx getting Smoochum, and Mantine getting Mantike. But truthfully, I only wanted to talk about Chimecho because it's one of my favorites. Sorry. Anyway, there's only one more Pokemon that I want to talk about in this video. One of the most bizarre looking Pokemon ever made, Probopass. Probopass is a weird Pokemon, but I guess that's probably obvious. I mean, if you've ever seen this thing, you know that it's a weird Pokemon, right? Putting aside the creative design, it's also a weird Pokemon from a competitive lens. Probopass is the evolved form of Nosepass. I'm doing the Pokedex thing. Probopass is the evolved form of Nosepass. People, feed me Pokeblocks. What do they give Rotom? I don't know. Anyway, Nosepass also has a weird design, but this isn't a design video, okay? I'm talking about competitive. I'm talking about evolution. Who knows what I'm talking about, okay? Let me talk about Probopass, whatever, okay? Hold on. Nosepass is pretty clearly designed to be like the single stage garbage Pokemon you find in a cave that you used to be Flannery because you have nothing else, and then you leave it in your box forever, right? And again, that's fine. I don't have an issue with Pokemon being bad. Like, I think it's good for Pokemon to be bad, right? Especially during a playthrough of a game. But the weird thing about Probopass is, as far as I can tell, I think they actually tried to make it good. Let's just look at Probopass's defenses to start, okay? The HP is a little low, but the defenses are so high that they can probably make up for it. These are very good defensive stats, okay? And unlike many rock-type Pokemon, Probopass even has good special defense. The problem is when we look at the other stats. Not one of these stats I would put into the usable category. That being said, there are Pokemon out there that have pretty bad offensive stats and pretty bad speed that are still good in competitive play because they excel at supporting their team, like Amoonguss or Cresselia. And on the one hand, Probopass was given an audition for this role because, unlike Nosepass, who is a pure rock type, Probopass gains the best defensive type in the game in Steel. But the problem is, Steel just happens to be one of the worst types to pair with Rock. Steel and Rock combine for 2 double weaknesses to fighting and ground, plus a regular weakness to water. Now, it's not the end of the world, but it's also not great to have a double weakness. But even this could have been forgiven if not for the move pool. Apart from Wide Guard, none of Probopass's moves are all that useful when it comes to supporting your team. Yes, it can Thunder Wave, but it's too slow to really make good use of it. Same with Gravity. It can set up an Iron defense, but that doesn't help when it's still taking twice as much damage from fighting and ground moves, even after doubling its defense. It gets Helping Hand, which I won't pretend to understand. Are those things hands? Are they supposed to be hands? I thought they were just like floating magnet rock things. Anyway, it doesn't even matter because the truth is that Helping Hand is given to almost every Pokemon in the game. It's not like a reason to use Probopass. But in a way, I guess it is fitting that Probopass gets Helping Hand, because if there's one Pokemon on this list that needs a little help, it might be Probopass. Or actually Dudunsparce. Game Freak will presumably continue to give older Pokemon new evolutions in upcoming Pokemon games. Only time will tell whether they'll create absolute monstrosities or complete disappointments. Realistically, probably both. All I hope is that they're half as cute as Chimecho. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you might like this other one I made talking about what the worst starter Pokemon of all time is.